The iron collar around her neck had been there so long that the skin beneath had scarred into permanent ridges, a constant reminder of the man who claimed he owned her. And when she stumbled into the dusty town of Red Creek, Arizona Territory in the summer of 1878, half dead from thirst and bleeding from the whip marks on her back, she never expected that a quiet cowboy with gentle hands would become the man who set her free. The sun beat down mercilessly on the single dirt road that ran through the heart of Red Creek, a small settlement that had sprung up near the copper mines about 5 years prior. The buildings were mostly rough timber and adobe, their facades bleached pale by the relentless Arizona sun. At the far end of town, past the saloon and the general store, stood a modest stable where a man named Daniel Garrett worked shoeing horses and tending to the livestock that passed through. He was 26 years old, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that fell past his collar. His eyes were a striking pale blue, almost gray in certain light, and he had the kind of face that women found handsome, though he seemed entirely unaware of this fact. He kept to himself mostly, speaking only when necessary, and the townspeople respected his quiet competence with animals and his unwavering honesty in his dealings. On that particular afternoon, Daniel had just finished shoeing a mare for the local doctor when he heard the commotion outside. Voices raised in alarm, the sound of running feet. He set down his tools and stepped out into the glaring sunlight, squinting as his eyes adjusted. A small crowd had gathered near the edge of town, and he could see them clustered around something or someone on the ground. He walked over with long strides, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. As he drew closer, the crowd parted slightly and he caught his first glimpse of her. She was lying in the dirt, her dress torn and filthy, her dark blonde hair matted with sweat and dust. But it was the collar around her neck that made his blood run cold. It was made of iron, heavy and cruel, with a thick ring at the front where a chain could be attached. The metal had rubbed her skin raw in places, and he could see old scars layered beneath the fresh wounds. She was conscious, but barely, her green eyes unfocused and glazed with pain and exhaustion. She looked to be in her early 20s, with delicate features that would have been pretty if not for the suffering etched into every line of her face. "Someone get Doc Preston," Daniel said, his voice quiet but commanding. He knelt down beside her, careful not to touch her yet, not wanting to frighten her. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyes found his face, and for a moment he saw terror flash through them. She tried to scramble backward, but her body was too weak to obey. A small whimper escaped her lips. "Easy now," Daniel said softly, the same tone he used with skittish horses. "Nobody here is going to hurt you. You are safe. Do you understand? You are safe here." She stared at him, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Slowly, very slowly, some of the panic faded from her eyes. She gave the tiniest nod. Doc Preston arrived within minutes, a portly man in his 50s with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined her quickly, noting the dehydration, the infected whip marks, the raw wounds from the collar. "We need to get her inside, out of this sun," he said. "Daniel, can you carry her to my office?" Daniel nodded and carefully slid his arms beneath her, lifting her as gently as he could. She weighed almost nothing, her body painfully thin beneath the ragged dress. As he carried her, he felt her tense in his arms, every muscle rigid with fear, but she did not cry out or struggle. Her eyes stayed fixed on his face, as if trying to determine whether he was friend or foe. The doctor's office was blessedly cool, the thick adobe walls keeping out the worst of the heat. Daniel laid her on the examination table, and she immediately tried to curl into herself, drawing her knees up protectively. "Miss, I am going to need to examine those wounds on your back," Doc Preston said gently, "and we need to get some water into you before you die of thirst. Will you let me help you?" She looked from the doctor to Daniel, her expression wary. Then, finally, she whispered, "Water?" Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. The doctor handed her a cup, but her hands shook so badly she could not hold it. Daniel stepped forward and supported the cup, helping her drink slowly. She gulped it down desperately, and he had to pull it away to keep her from making herself sick. "Slow now," he murmured. "You will get plenty. Just slow." Over the next hour, Doc Preston cleaned and bandaged her wounds while Daniel stayed nearby, somehow sensing that his presence calmed her. The doctor tried to examine the collar, but the moment his fingers touched the metal, she flinched so violently that he stepped back. That needs to come off, the doctor said, looking at Daniel. But I do not have the tools. That is thick iron. You would need a hacksaw or bolt cutters. I have what we need at the stable, Daniel said. But not here, not now. Let her rest first. Let her get her strength back. The girl, whose name they still did not know, looked at Daniel with something that might have been gratitude. Her eyes were already drooping with exhaustion, the water and the relative safety allowing her body to finally shut down and rest. Sleep, Daniel told her. You are safe here. I give you my word. She closed her eyes, and within moments she was unconscious. Doc Preston pulled Daniel aside. That collar, he said quietly. That is a slave collar. I have seen them before, though not for many years. Someone kept her in bondage. I figured as much, Daniel said, his jaw tight. Question is, who, and are they coming after her? We will have to ask her when she wakes up. In the meantime, I will keep her here. She needs at least a few days of rest and proper food before she will be strong enough to move around much. Daniel nodded. I will be back tomorrow to check on her. If anyone comes looking for a runaway, you send word to me immediately. You planning to protect her? The doctor asked, raising an eyebrow. I am planning to make sure she stays free, Daniel replied, whatever that takes. He returned to his stable and tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to the image of that collar and the fear in her eyes. Slavery had been abolished for over a decade, but he knew that in remote parts of the territory there were still men who kept people in bondage, hiding their crimes behind the vastness of the desert and the lack of law enforcement. The thought made him sick with anger. That evening he sat on the porch of the small cabin he had built behind his stable and cleaned his pistol methodically. He was not a violent man by nature, but he had learned to shoot during his years working cattle drives through hostile territory, and he was good at it. If someone came looking to reclaim that woman as property, they would find that Daniel Garrett was not a man to be pushed around. The next morning, he walked over to the doctor's office just after dawn. He found the woman awake, sitting up on the cot where the doctor had moved her. She had been cleaned up somewhat, her hair washed and her face scrubbed free of dirt. In the morning light, he could see that she was indeed quite beautiful, with high cheekbones and full lips, though her face was still gaunt from malnutrition. She was wearing a clean dress that the doctor's wife must have provided, though the collar still hung heavy around her neck, a grotesque contrast to the simple calico fabric. Morning, Daniel said softly, not wanting to startle her. How are you feeling? Better, she said. Her voice was still hoarse but stronger than yesterday. Thank you for helping me. No, thanks needed. He pulled up a chair and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. My name is Daniel Garrett. I work at the stable here in town. What is your name? She hesitated, as if she had not spoken her own name in so long that she had almost forgotten it. Catherine, she finally said. Catherine Wells. Pleased to meet you, Catherine, though I wish it were under better circumstances. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I do not want to push you, but we need to know if someone is going to come looking for you. Are you in danger? The fear flashed through her eyes again, quick and sharp. She brought her hand up to touch the collar, almost unconsciously. I ran, she whispered. I ran from him, from Mason Trent. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He knew that name. Everyone in the territory knew that name. Mason Trent was a rancher who owned a massive spread about 50 miles northwest of Red Creek. He was rich, powerful, and had a reputation for cruelty. Rumors swirled around him like buzzards, stories of men who worked for him and were never seen again, of business rivals who mysteriously disappeared. But he had money and influence, and the law mostly left him alone. How long were you with him? Daniel asked quietly. 5 years. Her voice broke on the words. He bought me from a man in Texas when I was 18, kept me locked up, made me work, made me do whatever he wanted. The collar was so I could not run. He said if I ever tried, he would find me and kill me. Daniel felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to keep his voice calm. You are not going back there, I promise you that. You do not understand, Catherine said, and tears began streaming down her face. He has men. He has guns. He has money. If he finds out I am here, he will come, and he will take me back, and he will hurt anyone who tries to stop him. Then we will make sure he does not find out you are here, Daniel said firmly. And if he does, we will deal with it. But right now, the most important thing is getting that collar off you. Will you let me try? She looked at him for a long moment, studying his face. He could see her weighing her options, trying to decide if she could trust him. Finally, she nodded. All right, Daniel said. I will go get my tools. I will be back within the hour. He stood and headed for the door, but her voice stopped him. Daniel? He turned back. Yes? Why are you helping me? You do not even know me. He met her eyes, those green eyes that held so much pain and so little hope. Because it is the right thing to do, he said simply. And because nobody deserves to wear a collar like that. Nobody. He returned with his tools as promised, carrying a hacksaw, several files, and a thick piece of leather. Doc Preston was there as well, and between the two of them, they explained to Catherine what they were going to do. The collar is riveted shut at the back, Daniel explained, having examined it closely. I am going to have to saw through the metal. It is going to take a while, and it is going to be loud and probably frightening, but I will be as careful as I can. I have this leather to put between the saw and your skin to protect you. Doc Preston will hold it in place while I work. Catherine nodded, her face pale but determined. Just do it, please. I want it off. They positioned her sitting backward on a chair, her arms wrapped around the back of it for support. Daniel knelt behind her and examined the collar closely. The metal was thick, designed to be impossible to remove without the proper key. But he had cut through thick metal before when repairing broken wagon wheels and farm equipment. It would just take time and patience. He began to saw, the teeth of the blade biting into the iron with a harsh metallic screech. Catherine flinched at the sound, her knuckles going white as she gripped the chair. Daniel worked steadily, his strokes even and controlled. The leather protected her skin from the friction and heat, and Doc Preston held it firmly in place. It took almost an hour. Daniel's arm ached from the repetitive motion, and sweat dripped down his face despite the relative coolness of the room. But slowly, steadily, the blade cut through the thick metal. Catherine sat through it all without complaint, though he could see tears streaming silently down her face. Finally, blessedly, the blade cut through the last bit of metal. The collar fell away in two pieces, clattering to the floor with a sound like chains breaking. Catherine sat frozen for a moment, as if she could not quite believe it. Then her hand came up slowly to touch her bare neck. The skin there was scarred and raw, marked by 5 years of bondage. But the collar was gone. A sob broke from her throat, and then another. Her whole body shook with the force of her crying, years of pain and fear and helplessness pouring out of her. Daniel stepped back, giving her space, but she turned suddenly and reached for him, her hands clutching at his shirt. He hesitated only a moment before putting his arms around her carefully, letting her cry against his chest. It is off, she kept saying between sobs. It is off. It is really off. It is off, Daniel confirmed quietly, and it is never going back on. That is a promise. He held her while she cried, this woman he barely knew, and felt something shift in his chest. A protectiveness, yes, but something more than that. Something he was not quite ready to name yet. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back, wiping at her face with shaking hands. I am sorry, she said. I did not mean to fall apart like that. You have nothing to be sorry for, Doc Preston said gently. He had been waiting quietly, letting her have her moment. You have been through hell and back. You are entitled to tears. Daniel picked up the 2 pieces of the collar from the floor. The metal was cold and heavy in his hands, obscene in its purpose. What do you want me to do with this? He asked Catherine. She looked at the broken collar, and her expression hardened. Bury it, she said. Bury it so deep that nobody will ever find it. Daniel nodded. Consider it done. That afternoon, when the sun was at its peak and the desert stretched out endlessly in all directions, Daniel rode out from town on his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper. The 2 pieces of the collar were in his saddlebag, wrapped in burlap. He rode for about an hour, heading east into empty scrubland, where nothing grew except sagebrush and the occasional stubborn cactus. When he was satisfied that he was far enough from town, he dismounted and pulled a shovel from where he had strapped it to his saddle. The ground was hard and rocky, difficult to dig, but he attacked it with determination. The hole grew deeper, 2 feet, then 3. When it was deep enough that he could not touch the bottom while kneeling, he stopped. He unwrapped the collar pieces and looked at them one last time. Then he dropped them into the hole and began to fill it in. The dirt covered the metal, hiding it from sight, and he packed it down firmly. When he was finished, he stood over the spot and said a quiet prayer, not for the collar, but for Catherine, that burying this symbol of her captivity might be the first step toward her freedom in every sense. He marked the location in his mind so he could tell her later where it was buried, then mounted Copper and rode back to town. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Over the next few days, Catherine remained at Doc Preston's office, recovering her strength. Daniel visited her every morning and evening, bringing her food from the boarding house and sitting with her for a while. At first, their conversations were stilted, both of them feeling their way carefully. But gradually, Catherine began to open up. She told him about her life before Trent. She had grown up in a small town in Missouri, the daughter of farmers. Her parents had died of fever when she was 16, and she had been left alone with no family and no means of support. She had worked as a maid for a wealthy family for a while, but when they moved east, they did not take her with them. She had ended up in Texas, working in a saloon, just trying to survive. That was where Trent had found her. He had been passing through, had seen her, and had decided he wanted her. He had paid off the saloon owner, claiming he was taking her on as a housekeeper. She had thought it was a legitimate job offer, a chance for something better. By the time she realized the truth, she was 50 miles from anywhere, locked in a room at his ranch, with that collar around her neck. "He kept 3 of us," she said quietly one evening. Daniel had brought her dinner, and they were sitting together in the small room behind the doctor's office. 3 women, we did the cooking and cleaning, but we were not servants. We were prisoners. The other 2 had been there longer than me. They were broken. They did not even try to fight anymore. "Are they still there?" Daniel asked, his jaw tight. "I think so. I did not see them when I ran. I waited until he was away on business, and then I picked the lock on my door. I had been working on learning how for months, using a piece of wire I found. I got out and just ran. I did not take food or water or anything. I just ran." "How long were you traveling?" 4 days, I think. Maybe 5. It all blurs together. I traveled at night and hid during the day. I did not know where I was going, just away. And then I saw Red Creek, and I thought maybe I could get help, but I collapsed before I made it all the way into town." Daniel reached out slowly and placed his hand over hers, where it rested on the table. She did not pull away. "You were brave," he said. "Braver than most people would have been." "I was desperate," she corrected. "There is a difference." "Maybe, but you still did it. You saved yourself." She looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "You helped," she said quietly. "You and Doc Preston and everyone here. I could not have made it without you." "You will always have help here," Daniel told her, "for as long as you need it." By the end of the first week, Catherine was well enough to leave the doctor's office. The question then became where she would stay. The town had a small boarding house, but Daniel worried about her being there alone if Trent's men came looking. After some discussion with Doc Preston and the town's informal mayor, a man named Samuel Cooper, who ran the general store, it was decided that Catherine would stay in the small guest room in the stable loft that Daniel sometimes rented to travelers. "It is not fancy," Daniel warned her as he showed her the room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the corral. "But it is private, and I am right downstairs if you need anything." "It is perfect," Catherine said, and she meant it. After 5 years of being locked in a small room at Trent's ranch, this felt like a palace. "Thank you, Daniel. You can earn your keep if you want," he said. "I could use help around the stable. Just light work, nothing too strenuous. Only if you want to, though. No pressure." She nodded eagerly. "I want to. I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," he said firmly. "But if you want to help, I will not say no." So Catherine became Daniel's unofficial assistant at the stable. She started slowly, just mucking out stalls and making sure the water troughs were full. But as her strength returned, she took on more tasks. She had a way with the horses, Daniel noticed. They calmed around her, responded to her gentle voice and patient hands. She told him that her father had kept horses on their farm in Missouri, and she had grown up around them. Working alongside each other every day, they grew closer. Daniel found himself looking forward to her presence, to the sound of her voice and her quiet laughter when he said something that amused her. She was smart and funny when she let herself relax, and every day a little more of the fear left her eyes. For Catherine, Daniel represented something she had thought lost forever: safety and kindness. He never pressured her, never touched her without permission, never made her feel like she owed him anything. He was patient and steady, like the horses he worked with, and slowly, carefully, she found herself trusting him in a way she had not trusted anyone in years. One evening, about 3 weeks after she had arrived in Red Creek, they were sitting together on the porch of the stable, watching the sun set. The sky was ablaze with color, deep purples and fiery oranges bleeding together on the horizon. Catherine had her sleeves rolled up, and Daniel could see the scars on her wrists where shackles had once been. "Can I ask you something personal?" Catherine said quietly. "Of course. Why have you never married? A man like you, I would have thought you would have been claimed by some woman by now." Daniel smiled slightly. "I came close once, about 4 years ago. There was a woman, Sarah, who worked at the boarding house. We courted for about 6 months. But she wanted to move back east, to live in a city. And I wanted to stay here. We wanted different things, so we parted ways." He paused. "What about you? Before Trent, was there anyone?" Catherine shook her head. "There were boys who were interested when I was younger, but my parents were protective, and then they died, and I was too busy trying to survive to think about romance. And then Trent took me, and after that, the thought of any man touching me made me sick." She looked at him. "Until recently." Daniel's breath caught. "Recently?" She met his eyes, and he could see vulnerability there, but also courage. "You are different, Daniel. You are kind. You are patient. You make me feel safe. And somewhere along the way, I started looking at you and feeling things I thought I would never feel again." He reached out slowly and took her hand. "I have feelings for you too, Catherine. I have been trying not to push, not to make you uncomfortable. You have been through so much, and the last thing I want is to add to your burdens." "You are not a burden," she said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "You are the opposite of a burden." He smiled and squeezed her hand gently. "Then maybe we can see where this goes, slow and careful, no rushing." "I would like that," Catherine said softly. They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the stars began to appear, still holding hands, both of them feeling like maybe, just maybe, they had found something precious in each other. But their peace was not to last. 2 days later, trouble arrived in Red Creek. Daniel was working in the stable when he heard horses approaching fast. He stepped out into the yard and saw 3 men riding in, their horses lathered with sweat. They were all armed, with pistols on their hips and rifles in their saddle scabbards. The man in the lead was tall and broad, with a thick black beard and cold eyes. Daniel did not recognize any of them, but instinct told him who they were. The men dismounted and looked around, taking in the town with assessing gazes. The leader spotted Daniel and walked over. "You there," the man said. "We are looking for a woman, about 23 years old, blonde hair, green eyes, runaway. Have you seen anyone matching that description?" Daniel kept his face neutral, his body relaxed. "This is a small town. We do not get many strangers passing through. What is this woman to you?" "She is property of Mason Trent," the man said bluntly. "Stole from him and ran off. He wants her back." "Property," Daniel repeated, his voice flat. "Slavery was abolished 13 years ago. You aware of that?" The man's eyes narrowed. "Do not get smart with me, boy. This is none of your concern. Now, have you seen her or not?" "I have not seen anyone matching that description," Daniel lied smoothly. "Like I said, we do not get many strangers here." The man studied him for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if he was telling the truth. Then he spat into the dirt. "We will be checking around town, asking questions. If we find out you are lying, there will be consequences." "You do what you need to do," Daniel said evenly. "But I suggest you do it politely. Folks around here do not take kindly to threats." The men left to search the town, and Daniel immediately went to find Catherine. She was in the stable loft, and from the look on her face, she had seen the men arrive. "He sent them," she whispered, her face pale. "He sent them to find me." "I know, but they have not found you yet, and we are going to make sure they do not." He thought quickly. "I need you to stay up here and stay quiet. Do not come down for any reason. I am going to talk to Samuel and Doc Preston, get everyone on the same page. This whole town is going to say they have never seen you. What if they search the stable? Then I will deal with it. but right now, I need you to trust me." She nodded, though he could see she was terrified. He wanted to pull her into his arms and promise her everything would be okay, but there was no time. He climbed down from the loft and went to rally the town. Red Creek might have been small, but the people there took care of their own. When Daniel explained the situation to Samuel Cooper, the man's face turned hard. "Mason Trent can go straight to hell," Samuel said. "We are not handing over that girl to anyone. She is under our protection now." They spread the word quickly, and by the time Trent's men had finished searching the saloon and the boarding house, everyone in town had their story straight. Nobody had seen a woman matching Catherine's description. Nobody knew anything about a runaway. The men searched for 2 hours, growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, the leader confronted Daniel again. "We know she came through here," he snarled. "Someone found tracks leading in this direction. She is here somewhere." "If she was here, she moved on," Daniel said calmly. "Lots of people pass through on their way to other places. Maybe she kept going." The man stepped closer, his hand resting on his pistol. "I think you are lying. I think you are hiding her." Daniel did not back down. "I think you are making accusations without proof, and I think Mason Trent should answer for keeping people in bondage when slavery is illegal. Maybe I should send a telegram to the territorial marshal, let him know what is happening out at that ranch." For a moment, Daniel thought the man might draw his gun, but then one of the other men called out, "Cole, let it go. We have searched everywhere. She is not here. Maybe she died in the desert." The man called Cole stared at Daniel for another long moment, then turned and walked back to his horse. "This is not over," he said. "We will be back." They mounted up and rode out of town, heading back northwest. Daniel watched them go, every muscle in his body tense until they were out of sight. That night, he sat with Catherine in the loft, both of them on edge. "They will be back," she said. "You know they will." "Maybe, but every day you are here, you get stronger. And every day that passes, it gets harder for them to find you." He paused. "Catherine, I want you to think about something. What if we left Red Creek? What if we went somewhere Trent could never find you? Where would we go? California, maybe, or up to Colorado. Somewhere far enough away that Trent's reach does not extend. We could start over, build a new life." "We?" she asked softly. He met her eyes. "I am not letting you face this alone. If you go, I go. If you stay, I stay. I am with you, Catherine, wherever that takes us." Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of fear this time. "You would give up your life here for me?" "In a heartbeat," he said. "This stable, this town, they are just places. You are more important than any of that." She reached for him then, and he pulled her close. She buried her face against his chest, and he held her tight, feeling her heart beating against his. "I am scared," she whispered. "I know, but you do not have to be scared alone anymore. We are in this together." They spent that night planning, discussing their options, weighing the risks. By morning, they had made a decision. They would stay in Red Creek for now, but they would be prepared to leave at a moment's notice. Daniel would sell the stable to Samuel Cooper, who had been looking to expand his business interests anyway. They would get horses and supplies ready, and if Trent's men came back, they would run. But Daniel was also thinking about something else, something more permanent. If he and Catherine were going to build a life together, he wanted to do it right. He wanted to marry her, wanted to make her his wife in the eyes of God and the law. But he knew it was too soon, knew she needed more time to heal from everything she had been through. So he kept his thoughts to himself and focused on keeping her safe. The next few weeks passed in tense anticipation. Every time riders approached town, Daniel's hand went to his gun. But Trent's men did not return, and slowly, carefully, they began to relax. Catherine continued to work at the stable, growing stronger every day. The scars on her neck were fading, and the haunted look in her eyes was gradually being replaced by something softer, something that looked like hope. One evening, Daniel took her on a ride out into the desert. They rode for about an hour, until they reached a small canyon where a spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a tiny oasis of green in the endless brown landscape. It was a place Daniel had discovered years ago, a secret spot he had never shown anyone. "It is beautiful," Catherine said, dismounting and walking to the edge of the spring. The water was clear and cold, and she knelt down to splash some on her face. "I wanted to show you something," Daniel said. He walked over to a large flat rock near the spring and pointed to the ground beside it. This is where I buried the collar. Catherine looked down at the unremarkable patch of earth, now indistinguishable from the ground around it. Here, in this place, where the water runs clean and the earth is untouched. I thought you might want to know where it was, in case you ever wanted to come back, or in case you wanted to never think about it again. She stared at the spot for a long moment, and he could not read her expression. Then she knelt down and placed her hand flat on the ground, as if she could feel the buried metal through the earth. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for doing this, for caring enough to make it mean something." "It does mean something," Daniel said. "It means you are free. It means the past is buried, and the future is yours to decide." She stood and turned to face him, and in the golden light of the setting sun, she looked radiant. "I have decided something," she said. "I have decided that I want to stay here, in Red Creek, with you. I do not want to run anymore. I want to build a life, a real life, and I want to build it with you." Daniel felt his heart swell. "Are you sure? Because if Trent comes back, if he finds you here, there is going to be trouble." "Then there will be trouble," Catherine said firmly. "But I am done letting him control my life. I am done being afraid. If he comes, we will face him together. But I am not running anymore." Daniel closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," he said. Then he kissed her, soft and gentle, putting all his feelings into the one gesture. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. "I love you, Daniel Garrett. I did not think I would ever be able to say those words to anyone, but I love you." "I love you too, Catherine Wells, more than I can put into words." They stayed at the spring until the stars came out, talking about their dreams for the future. Catherine wanted to start a small garden, wanted to learn to cook something other than the bare essentials. Daniel talked about expanding the stable, maybe starting to breed horses. They were simple dreams, ordinary dreams, but for two people who had both been through so much, they were everything. When they returned to Red Creek that night, they found the town in an uproar. Samuel Cooper met them as they rode in, his face grim. "Trent himself was here," he said, "about an hour ago. He was asking about the woman. I told him the same thing we told his men, but Daniel, he did not believe me. He said he knows she is here, and he is coming back tomorrow with more men. He said if we do not hand her over, there will be consequences." Daniel felt his blood run cold. How many men? He did not say, but from the way he was talking, I would guess at least a dozen. "Daniel, we are a small town. We have maybe 10 men who can handle a gun, and most of them are not fighters. If Trent comes back with an army, I do not know if we can protect her." Daniel looked at Catherine, saw the fear in her eyes, but also the determination. "We are not handing her over," he said, "no matter what." "Then we need a plan," Samuel said. They spent the rest of the night preparing. Every able-bodied man in town was given a rifle and assigned a position. The women and children were sent to the church, the most fortified building in town. Daniel and Catherine stayed at the stable, both of them armed and ready. "You do not have to do this," Daniel told her. "You could still run. Get on a horse and ride out now. Be miles away by morning." "And leave you to face him alone? Yeah, never." She checked the chambers of the pistol he had given her, her hands steady. "We face him together. That is what we said." Daniel pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "If things go badly tomorrow, if it looks like we are going to lose, I want you to promise me you will run. Do not let him take you back. Promise me." "I promise," she said, though they both knew it was a lie. They did not sleep that night. They sat together in the loft, holding each other, watching the darkness for any sign of movement. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, they heard it. Horses, many of them, approaching from the northwest. "They are here," Daniel said quietly. They climbed down from the loft and stepped out into the street. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The beauty of it seemed obscene, given what was about to happen. Mason Trent rode into town at the head of a group of 15 men, all of them armed to the teeth. Trent himself was a large man, probably in his mid-40s, with graying hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty etched into every line. He looked around the town with an expression of contempt. Then his eyes landed on Catherine. "There you are," he said, and his voice was smooth and cold as ice. "Catherine, darling, did you really think you could run from me?" "I am not going back with you," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the fear Daniel could feel radiating from her. You have no right to me. I am a free woman. Trent laughed, a sound devoid of humor. A free woman? Is that what you think? You are mine, Catherine. I paid good money for you, and I always get what I pay for. Slavery is illegal, Daniel said, stepping forward to stand beside Catherine. Whatever arrangement you had with her is void. She does not belong to anyone. Trent's eyes flicked to Daniel, assessing him. And who are you? Someone who is not going to let you take her. Is that so? Trent gestured to his men. I have 15 guns here. How many do you have? 5? 6? This is not a fight you can win, boy. Hand over the woman, and we will leave peacefully. Refuse, and people are going to die. Then people are going to die, Daniel said flatly, because we are not handing her over. Trent's expression darkened. You are making a mistake. The only mistake here is you thinking you can ride into this town and take what does not belong to you, Samuel Cooper said, stepping out from the general store with a rifle in his hands. One by one, the other men of Red Creek emerged from their positions, all armed, all facing down Trent's men. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Daniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest, could feel the weight of the pistol on his hip. He was not a violent man, but he was prepared to kill to protect Catherine if it came to that. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice cut through the silence. Mason Trent, you are under arrest. Everyone turned to see a man riding into town from the east, a star pinned to his vest. He was probably in his 50s, with a weathered face and sharp gray eyes. Daniel recognized him from wanted posters he had seen. It was Marshal Thomas Wexler, the territorial marshal. Trent's face went pale. Marshal, what are you doing here? Responding to a telegram I received 3 days ago, Wexler said, dismounting. Seems someone reported that you have been keeping people in bondage out at your ranch. Thought I should come investigate. He looked at Catherine, took in the healing scars on her neck, and his expression hardened. Looks like the report was accurate. I do not know what lies you have been told, but... Trent began. Save it, Wexler interrupted. I have already been to your ranch, found 2 women locked in rooms, both wearing collars. They told me all about you, Trent, about what you have been doing. You are done. Trent's hand went to his gun, but before he could draw, Daniel had his own pistol out and aimed at Trent's chest. Do not, Daniel said quietly. It is over. For a moment, Trent looked like he might try it anyway. But then he saw the marshal's gun also trained on him, and he slowly raised his hands. Smart choice, Wexler said. He gestured to Trent's men. The rest of you, ride out. You are not under arrest yet, but if you try to help him, that will change real fast. The men looked at each other, clearly weighing their options. Then, one by one, they turned their horses and rode away, leaving Trent alone. Wexler pulled out a pair of shackles and cuffed Trent's hands behind his back. Mason Trent, you are under arrest for unlawful imprisonment, assault, and violations of the 13th Amendment. You will be taken to Prescott to stand trial. As Wexler led Trent away, the man looked back at Catherine one last time. This is not over, he snarled. I will get out, and when I do, you will spend the rest of your life in prison. Wexler said calmly. The sentence for what you have done is 20 years minimum. You are not getting out, Trent. It is over. They watched as the marshal put Trent on a horse and rode out of town, heading toward Prescott. As they disappeared from view, Daniel felt Catherine collapse against him, all the tension draining from her body at once. It is really over, she whispered. He is gone. He can never hurt me again. It is really over, Daniel confirmed, wrapping his arms around her. You are free, Catherine. Truly free. The town erupted in cheers, the tension breaking like a thunderstorm, finally releasing its rain. People came out of their hiding places, laughing and crying and embracing. Samuel clapped Daniel on the back, grinning. Did you send that telegram to the marshal? Daniel asked. I did, right after Trent's first men came through, figured we might need the law on our side. Samuel looked at Catherine. You are safe now, miss. He can never hurt you again. Thank you, Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. Thank you all. I do not know how I can ever repay you. You do not need to repay us, Samuel said kindly. You are one of us now. That is how it works in Red Creek. We take care of our own. Over the next few days, the town slowly returned to normal. The marshal sent word that the 2 other women from Trent's ranch had been freed and were being cared for. Trent was in jail in Prescott awaiting trial. Catherine finally, truly allowed herself to believe that her nightmare was over. One evening, about a week after Trent's arrest, Daniel took Catherine back out to the spring in the desert. They sat together on the flat rock, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. "I have been thinking," Daniel said slowly, "about the future, about what we both want." "What have you been thinking?" Catherine asked, turning to face him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. When he opened it, there was a simple gold ring inside, nothing fancy but clearly made with care. "I know we have not been together long," Daniel said, "and I know you have been through things that most people cannot even imagine. But Catherine, I love you. I love you more than I have ever loved anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you will have me. Will you marry me?" Catherine stared at the ring, tears filling her eyes. "Daniel, I do not have anything to bring to a marriage. No dowry, no family, no property. I am just a woman with scars and a past." "You have yourself," Daniel said firmly, "and that is more than enough. You are strong and brave and kind. You are everything I could ever want. So, what do you say? Will you be my wife?" She looked at him, at this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, and she felt her heart overflow with love. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her, deep and passionate, pouring all his love into that kiss. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling through their tears. They were married 3 weeks later, in the small church in Red Creek. The whole town turned out for the wedding, everyone dressed in their Sunday best. Catherine wore a simple white dress that the women of the town had sewn together for her, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Daniel had picked that morning. She had never looked more beautiful. Doc Preston officiated, since the town did not have a regular preacher. He spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad. When he asked Daniel if he took Catherine to be his wife, Daniel said, "I do," in a voice that rang with conviction. When he asked Catherine the same question, she looked at Daniel and said, "I do," with tears of joy streaming down her face. They exchanged rings, and then Doc Preston said, "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel, you may kiss your bride." Daniel cupped Catherine's face in his hands and kissed her gently, sweetly, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked down the aisle hand in hand, husband and wife, ready to face whatever the future held together. The town threw them a reception in the stable, which they had decorated with ribbons and lanterns. There was food and music and dancing, and Catherine laughed more than she had in years. She danced with Daniel, with Samuel, with Doc Preston, with everyone who asked. For the first time in 5 years, she felt truly happy, truly safe, truly free. That night, they went back to the small room in the loft that was now their home. Daniel carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing. He set her down gently, and they stood together in the lamplight, just looking at each other. "Mrs. Garrett," Daniel said softly. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Catherine said. She reached up and touched his face, tracing the lines of his jaw. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for giving me a life worth living." "You saved yourself," he reminded her. "You were the one who ran, who fought for your freedom. I just helped you along the way." "We saved each other," she said. "That is the truth of it. You gave me freedom, and I gave you love. We are a good team." "The best team," he agreed. Then he kissed her, and they lost themselves in each other, celebrating their marriage and their love and the bright future that stretched out before them. The next few months were the happiest of Catherine's life. She and Daniel settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked together at the stable every day, building up the business. Catherine proved to have a talent for training horses, especially the skittish ones that other people had trouble with. She understood fear, understood trauma, and she knew how to be patient and gentle while still being firm. Word spread, and soon people were coming from neighboring towns to have Catherine work with their problem horses. The stable began to thrive, and Daniel used the extra money to make improvements. He built an addition onto their small home, giving them a proper bedroom and a sitting room. Catherine planted a garden behind the stable, growing vegetables and flowers. She loved having her hands in the dirt, loved watching things grow under her care. They made friends with their neighbors, attended church on Sundays, participated in town events. Catherine was embraced by the community, no longer seen as the stranger with the collar, but as Daniel's wife, as one of them. She volunteered at the school, teaching the children about horses and how to care for them. She helped the other women with sewing and canning. She built a life. And through it all, her love for Daniel only grew stronger. He was her partner in every sense of the word, supporting her dreams and sharing her burdens. They talked about everything, laughed together, worked together, made love together. They were happy in a way that felt almost impossible given where Catherine had been just a year ago. About 8 months after their wedding, Catherine realized she was pregnant. She told Daniel one evening after they had finished work for the day. They were sitting on the porch of their home, watching the sun set as they often did. "Daniel, I have something to tell you," she said, her voice nervous but excited. He looked at her, immediately concerned. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Actually, something is very right." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Daniel just stared at her, processing the information. Then a huge smile broke across his face. "A baby? Really? Really? I have been feeling sick in the mornings, and I am late, and I went to see Doc Preston yesterday to confirm. He said I am about 2 months along." Daniel let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around. "We are going to be parents, Catherine. This is the best news." She laughed, holding on to him. "I am scared," she admitted. "I do not know how to be a mother. What if I'm not good at it?" "You will be amazing at it," Daniel said firmly, setting her down and looking into her eyes. "You are patient and loving and strong. Our child is going to be so lucky to have you as a mother." "And to have you as a father," she said softly. "You are going to be a wonderful father, Daniel." They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and nurseries and all the things they would need to prepare. Catherine felt a flutter of fear mixed with her excitement. She had never imagined she would have the chance to be a mother, had thought that future was stolen from her, along with her freedom. But now, here she was, carrying Daniel's child, building the family she had always dreamed of. The pregnancy was not easy. Catherine was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep food down. But Daniel was patient and attentive, bringing her broth and crackers, holding her hair back when she was sick, rubbing her back when it ached. As her belly grew, she had to cut back on the physical work at the stable, and she chafed at the limitations. But Daniel insisted she rest, and eventually she gave in. Doc Preston checked on her regularly, and he assured them both that the baby was healthy and developing well. As winter approached, Catherine spent more time indoors, sewing tiny clothes and blankets for the baby. The women of Red Creek threw her a party, bringing gifts and advice and stories of their own pregnancies. Catherine sat in the middle of all the attention, feeling loved and supported in a way she had never experienced before. She was 7 months along when a letter arrived from Prescott. It was from Marshal Wexler, and Daniel read it aloud to Catherine one evening. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Garrett," the letter began, "I wanted to inform you that the trial of Mason Trent has concluded. He was found guilty on all counts and has been sentenced to 30 years in the territorial prison. Additionally, his ranch and all his assets have been seized by the territory. The 2 women who were freed from his property have been given compensation and are now living freely in Prescott. I wanted you to know that justice has been served and Mr. Trent will never be able to hurt anyone again. I hope this news brings you peace. Respectfully, Marshal Thomas Wexler." Catherine sat in silence for a long moment after Daniel finished reading. Then she started to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Daniel pulled her into his arms, letting her cry it out. "It is really over," she kept saying. "It is really, truly over. He can never hurt me again. He can never hurt anyone again." "It is over," Daniel confirmed, holding her tight. "You are free, Catherine. You are safe, and you are loved." That night, Catherine felt the baby kick for the first time, a small flutter in her belly like a butterfly. She grabbed Daniel's hand and placed it on her stomach, and they felt it again, stronger this time. "That is our baby," Daniel said, his voice full of wonder. "Our child. Our future," Catherine said. "Everything we went through, all the pain and fear, it led us here, to this moment, to this life." "No regrets?" Daniel asked. "Not a single one," she said. "I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here with you." In March of 1879, Catherine went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted nearly 20 hours. Daniel paced outside the bedroom, listening to her cries, feeling helpless and terrified. Doc Preston and his wife were with Catherine, helping her through it, but Daniel could do nothing but wait and pray. Finally, just as the sun was beginning to set, he heard a new sound, a baby's cry, strong and loud. Doc Preston opened the door, smiling. "Congratulations, Daniel. You have a son, a big, healthy boy." Daniel rushed into the room. Catherine was lying in the bed, exhausted and pale, but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. Daniel approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a tuft of dark hair and a red scrunched-up face. His eyes were closed, but his little fists were waving in the air. He was perfect. "Do you want to hold him?" Catherine asked, her voice hoarse from screaming, but full of love. Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Catherine placed the baby in his arms, and Daniel looked down at his son, feeling his heart expand to accommodate this new, overwhelming love. "He is perfect," Daniel finally managed to say. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Catherine asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but had not settled on anything. Daniel looked down at the baby, thinking, "What about Thomas, after the marshal who saved you?" Catherine smiled. "Thomas Garrett, I like it. Thomas Daniel Garrett." "Thomas Daniel Garrett," Daniel repeated, looking at his son. "Welcome to the world, Tommy. We are going to take such good care of you." Those first few weeks with a newborn were exhausting but joyful. Tommy was a good baby, only fussy when he was hungry or needed changing. Catherine took to motherhood naturally, nursing him and rocking him and singing to him in a soft, sweet voice. Daniel was besotted with his son, constantly holding him and talking to him, even though the baby could not possibly understand yet. The stable work fell mostly to Daniel during those weeks, and Samuel hired a young man to help out part-time. But Daniel did not mind the extra work. Every time he came home and saw Catherine with Tommy, his heart swelled with gratitude for the life they had built together. As Tommy grew, so did their family's happiness. He was a happy baby who smiled easily and laughed often. He had Daniel's blue eyes and Catherine's blonde hair, and everyone who saw him commented on how beautiful he was. Catherine took him everywhere with her, carrying him in a sling against her chest while she did light work around the stable. Daniel built a cradle for him and placed it in the stable office so Tommy could be near them while they worked. When Tommy was 6 months old, Catherine realized she was pregnant again. She told Daniel one evening while they were putting Tommy to bed. "Already?" Daniel said, surprised but pleased. "That was fast." "Irish twins," Catherine said, using the term for children born less than a year apart. "I did not plan it, but I am happy about it. Are you?" "I am thrilled," Daniel said honestly. "One more little person to love. Our family is growing." This pregnancy was easier than the first. Catherine was not as sick, and she had more energy. She chased after Tommy, who was learning to crawl and getting into everything, while her belly grew with his sibling. Daniel expanded their home again, adding another small bedroom for the children. Their second child, a daughter, was born in the spring of 1880. The labor was shorter this time, only 8 hours, and when Doc Preston placed the baby in Catherine's arms, she was overwhelmed with love. The little girl had dark hair like her brother, but Catherine's green eyes. "What should we name her?" Daniel asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and looking at his daughter. "I want to name her after your mother," Catherine said. "What was her name?" "Elizabeth. She died when I was 12. "Elizabeth Garrett," Catherine said softly. "Lizzie for short. Do you like it?" "I love it," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "My mother would have loved you, Catherine. She would have been so proud of the woman you are and the mother you have become." "I wish I could have met her," Catherine said. "Me too. But I think she is watching over us somehow, keeping us safe." They raised their children with love and attention, teaching them to be kind and hard-working. Tommy grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved horses as much as his parents did. Lizzie was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a stubborn streak that reminded Daniel of Catherine. They were happy children, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. As the years passed, the stable continued to thrive. Daniel and Catherine became well known throughout the territory as the best horse trainers around. They expanded their operation, hiring additional help and building more stalls. They bought a small plot of land on the edge of town and built a proper house with 4 bedrooms and a kitchen and a parlor. It was nothing fancy, but it was theirs, and they filled it with love and laughter. Catherine never forgot where she had come from or what she had survived. She volunteered at a charitable organization that helped women who had escaped from abusive situations, offering them shelter and assistance. She shared her own story with the women she helped, letting them know that it was possible to rebuild after trauma, that there was hope for a better future. Many of the women she helped went on to build successful lives, and they credited Catherine with giving them the courage to start over. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Daniel took Catherine back out to the spring in the desert. The children were with Samuel and his wife for the evening, giving Daniel and Catherine a rare night alone together. They sat on the flat rock where he had proposed, watching the sun set in shades of pink and gold. Catherine leaned against Daniel's shoulder, feeling utterly content. "Do you remember that night?" Daniel asked, gesturing to the spot where the collar was buried. "When I brought you here and showed you where I had buried it?" "I remember," Catherine said. "I was so scared then. Scared that Trent would find me. Scared that I would never be truly free. Scared that I would never be able to have a normal life." "And now?" Daniel asked. "Now I have everything I ever dreamed of and more," Catherine said. "I have you. I have our children. I have a home and friends and a purpose. I have a life worth living." "You have freedom," Daniel said. "That is what you fought for, and that is what you have." Catherine thought about that. Freedom. It was such a simple word, but it encompassed everything. The freedom to make her own choices, to love who she wanted, to build the life she wanted. The freedom to wake up each morning without fear, to go to sleep each night feeling safe. The freedom to be herself, fully and completely. "You gave me that freedom," she said. "You cut off that collar and buried it, and in doing so, you set me free." "You were always free," Daniel said. "The collar was just metal. It could not touch who you really were inside. You freed yourself, Catherine. I just helped." She turned to look at him, at this man who had become her whole world. "We freed each other," she said. "You freed me from my past, and I freed you from loneliness. We made each other whole." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and they sat together as the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was richer and fuller than either of them had ever imagined possible. Years continued to pass, marked by the growth of their children and the changing seasons. Tommy grew into a tall, strong young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's way with horses. He took over more and more of the stable work as Daniel grew older, eventually becoming a partner in the business. Lizzie married a school teacher from a neighboring town, a kind man who loved her fierce intelligence and independent spirit. They had children of their own, making Daniel and Catherine grandparents. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party. The whole town came out to celebrate, bringing food and gifts and stories. Daniel and Catherine stood in the middle of it all, their arms around each other, looking at the life they had built together. 20 years, Catherine said, shaking her head in wonder. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "Best 20 years of my life," Daniel said. "Every single day with you has been a gift." Samuel Cooper, now well into his 70s but still spry, raised a glass to toast them. "To Daniel and Catherine Garrett," he said loudly, and the crowd quieted to listen. 20 years ago, Daniel brought a woman into our town who was wearing a collar of bondage. He cut that collar off, buried it in the desert, and gave her the freedom to build a new life. And what a life they have built. They have shown all of us what love looks like, what commitment looks like, what courage looks like. They have raised wonderful children, built a successful business, and made our community stronger. To Daniel and Catherine. "To Daniel and Catherine," the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. She looked around at all the faces, at the people who had become her family, her friends, her community. She thought about that terrified woman who had stumbled into Red Creek 20 years ago, half dead and wearing a slave collar, and she could hardly believe she was the same person. But she was. She carried the scars of that experience, both visible and invisible. But she also carried the strength she had gained from surviving it, the wisdom she had learned from rebuilding her life, the love she had found with Daniel. All of it had made her who she was. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the children had taken the grandchildren to bed, Daniel and Catherine sat together on the porch of their home. The desert stretched out endlessly before them, dark and mysterious under the light of the stars. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had not run? Daniel asked quietly. If you had stayed at Trent's ranch? Sometimes, Catherine admitted. I think I would have died there, eventually, either from the abuse or from the despair. Running was the only choice I had if I wanted to survive. I am glad you ran, Daniel said. I am glad you stumbled into Red Creek. I am glad I got to be the one to cut that collar off your neck. I am glad too, Catherine said. She took his hand and squeezed it. You saved my life, Daniel, not just by removing the collar, but by showing me that I was worthy of love, that I deserved happiness, that my past did not define my future. You gave me permission to be free. You did the same for me, Daniel said. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working and existing, but not really living. You taught me what it means to truly love someone, to build a life with someone, to be part of something bigger than myself. You made me whole, Catherine. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Then Catherine said, Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I was lying in the dirt and you knelt down beside me? I said you were safe, Daniel replied. You promised me I was safe, Catherine corrected. And you kept that promise. Every single day for 20 years, you have kept me safe, not by locking me away or controlling me, but by loving me and supporting me and standing beside me. You have given me the kind of safety that comes from being truly seen and truly valued. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You have given me the same gift, Daniel said, and I will keep giving it to you for as long as I live. Then I guess we both got lucky, Catherine said, smiling. The luckiest, Daniel agreed. They grew old together, Daniel and Catherine Garrett, watching their children raise their own children and eventually welcoming great-grandchildren into the family. The stable passed fully to Tommy, who ran it with the same dedication and integrity his father had shown. Lizzie became a teacher herself, following in her husband's footsteps, and she taught generations of children in Red Creek. Daniel's hair turned gray and then white, and his back grew stiff from years of hard work. Catherine's face lined with wrinkles, but her green eyes remained bright and full of life. They moved a little slower, worked a little less, but they never stopped loving each other with the same intensity they had felt from the beginning. On a warm evening in the spring of 1903, when they had been married for 25 years, Daniel and Catherine took one last ride out to the spring in the desert. They were both in their 50s now, and the ride was harder than it used to be, but they made it. They sat on their rock, the one where so many important moments of their life had taken place, and looked at the spot where the collar was buried. A quarter-century had passed since Daniel had put it in the ground, and the earth had long since reclaimed the site. There was no mark, no indication that anything significant had ever happened here. I can barely remember what it felt like to wear it, Catherine said quietly. Is not that strange? Something that was so much a part of my life for 5 years, and now I can barely remember the weight of it. That is not strange, Daniel said. That is healing. That is what it looks like when you truly leave the past behind. I have left it behind, Catherine said, but I have not forgotten. I use my past to help other women who are going through what I went through. I turn my pain into something useful, something that can make a difference. That is why you are the strongest person I know, Daniel said. You took something terrible and found a way to use it for good. Not everyone can do that. Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder. I could not have done it without you. You were my foundation, Daniel. You were the solid ground I stood on while I rebuilt myself. And you were my purpose, Daniel replied. You gave my life meaning. They sat together as the sun set one more time, two old people who had loved each other through everything life had thrown at them. They had faced hardship and danger, had raised children and built a business, had laughed and cried and fought and made up. They had built a life that was extraordinary in its ordinariness, a quiet testament to the power of love and commitment. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, Catherine said, Daniel, I want you to know something. When I was at my lowest, when I was trapped and hopeless and could not see any way out, I used to dream about being free. I would close my eyes and imagine what freedom would feel like. And what I have had with you, this life we have built together, it is so much better than anything I could have dreamed. You gave me more than freedom. You gave me love. You gave me home. Daniel pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. You gave me the same things, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat, every single moment, if it meant ending up here with you. They rode back to Red Creek as the moon rose. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had created something beautiful together. When they reached their home, their children and grandchildren were there waiting for them, having planned a surprise family dinner. The house was full of laughter and warmth and love. 3 generations gathered under one roof. Catherine stood in the doorway, looking at all the faces of the people she loved, and she felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about that caller, buried deep in the desert, hidden beneath years of dirt and sand. It was gone, truly gone, as powerless now as dust. And she was here, surrounded by family, living a life she had once thought impossible. Daniel came up beside her and took her hand. "You all right?" he asked softly. "I am perfect," Catherine said. "I am home." And she was. She was truly, finally, completely home. The collar from her past was buried forever, just as Daniel had promised it would be, and in its place was a life built on freedom and love and hope. It had taken courage to run, courage to trust, courage to love again after everything she had been through, but it had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every tear shed, every scar borne, it had all been worth it to end up here. That night, as they lay in bed together, Daniel asleep beside her, Catherine touched her neck where the collar had once been. The scars were still there, faint now, but permanent. She used to hate those scars, used to see them as marks of shame. But over the years, she had come to see them differently. They were proof that she had survived. They were evidence of her strength. They were a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. She thought about the woman she had been when she stumbled into Red Creek, broken and terrified. And she thought about the woman she was now, whole and happy and free. They were the same woman, but they were also completely different. The journey between them had been long and difficult, but Daniel had walked it with her every step of the way. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, though Daniel could not hear her. "Thank you for cutting off that collar. Thank you for burying it. Thank you for setting me free. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything." The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges as they always did. The new century brought new technologies to the Arizona Territory, which became a state in 1912. Daniel and Catherine watched the world change around them, but their love remained constant. Daniel passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1915, at the age of 63. Catherine held his hand as he took his last breath, tears streaming down her face, but grateful that he had not suffered. He was buried in the small cemetery on the edge of Red Creek, under a simple headstone that read, "Daniel Garrett, beloved husband, father, and friend." Catherine lived another 7 years without him, staying active in the community and spending time with her children and grandchildren. She never remarried, though several men showed interest. Daniel had been the love of her life, and she had no desire to replace him. She kept his memory alive by telling stories about him to anyone who would listen, making sure her grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew what kind of man their grandfather had been. On a spring morning in 1922, Catherine woke up feeling tired and weak. She knew somehow that her time was coming. She called her children to her bedside, and they gathered around her, holding her hands and telling her they loved her. "I have had a good life," Catherine told them, her voice weak but content. "Better than I ever could have hoped for. Your father gave me that life. He saved me in every way a person can be saved, and then he spent the rest of his days making sure I knew I was loved. I want you to remember that. Remember that love is the most powerful force in the world. It can heal wounds you think will never heal. It can build hope where there was only despair. It can set you free." She looked at each of her children and grandchildren, wanting to memorize their faces one last time. Tommy, now a middle-aged man with his own grandchildren. Lizzie, still teaching, still fierce and independent. And all the others, the fruits of the life she and Daniel had built together. "Tell my story," she said. "When I am gone, tell people about the collar and how your father cut it off and buried it. Tell them about what we built together. Let our story be proof that no matter how dark things seem, there is always hope for something better." "We will, Mama," Tommy said, tears streaming down his face. "We promise." Catherine smiled and closed her eyes. Her last thought was of Daniel, young and strong, kneeling beside her in the dirt that first day, and promising her she was safe. He had kept that promise. For all the years of their life together, he had kept that promise. And then, peacefully, she slipped away. She was buried next to Daniel, and the whole town turned out for her funeral. People spoke about her kindness, her strength, her generosity. They told stories about the woman who had arrived wearing a slave collar and had gone on to build an extraordinary life. They talked about her work helping other women, about the families she had raised, about the impact she had made on Red Creek and the surrounding communities. But the most powerful tribute came from her granddaughter, who stood up and told the story of the collar. She described how Catherine had stumbled into town half dead, how Daniel had cut off the symbol of her bondage, how he had buried it in the desert where it could never hurt her again. She talked about the love that had grown between them, about the life they had built, about the freedom Catherine had claimed and held onto with both hands. "My grandmother taught me that our past does not define us," the granddaughter said. "She showed me that no matter what we have been through, we have the power to choose our future. She was a slave who became a free woman. She was a victim who became a survivor. She was a broken woman who became whole. And she did it all because she had the courage to run, the courage to trust, and the courage to love. Let her story inspire us all to be that brave." Years later, the stable that Daniel and Catherine had built was still standing, still in operation, run by their descendants. The house they had lived in was still there, occupied by their great-great-grandchildren. Their story had become part of the folklore of Red Creek, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love and the possibility of redemption. And far out in the desert, at a spring where water still bubbled up from the rocks and created a small oasis of green, there was a spot where an iron collar lay buried. No one knew exactly where anymore. The location had been lost to time, but it did not matter. The collar was gone, its power broken, its cruelty ended. What remained was the story of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. A cowboy and a woman in bondage, a quiet man with gentle hands and a terrified woman who thought she would never be free. They had come together, had fallen in love, had built a life that was remarkable in its goodness and its joy. The collar from her past had hung around her neck for 5 long years, a symbol of everything that had been taken from her. But the cowboy had cut it off and buried it forever, giving her back not just her freedom, but her very self. And in return, she had given him love, purpose, and a family. It was a simple story in many ways, played out in a small town in the Arizona Territory during the waning years of the Old West. But it was also an extraordinary story, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope persists, that even when we are broken, we can be made whole, that even when we are enslaved, we can find freedom. And that love, true love, the kind that asks for nothing and gives everything, can change the entire course of a life. The collar was buried, but the love remained, passed down through generations, a legacy that would never fade. Daniel and Catherine Garrett had lived and loved and built something beautiful together, and their story, the story of the collar that was cut off and buried forever, would be told for generations to come, inspiring others to be brave enough to run toward freedom, to trust enough to love again, and to believe that a better life is always possible. That was their gift to the world. That was their legacy. That was the true meaning of freedom, the kind that comes not from the absence of chains, but from the presence of love. And it endured, long after they were gone, a light in the darkness for anyone who needed to believe that redemption was possible and that love could truly conquer all.